The pen was already moving when his hand came down over mine. Not grabbing, nothing like that. Just resting there, gentle as a father stopping a child from touching a hot stove. And that was the part that scared me, later, when I had time to think about it. How careful he was. How sorry. "Mr. Hayes," Marcus Ellison said, "I'm sorry. I can't accept this today." I looked up at him and I smiled, because at 71 years old, when something makes no sense, your first instinct is that it must be a joke you're too slow to get. I'd been signing my name in that bank since Gerald Ford was president. Harbor Community Bank, corner of 3rd and Lakeview, Cedar Harbor, Michigan. I signed the loan papers for my first house at that counter. I signed the paperwork for my Ellen's funeral in the little office behind it, with a man who kept a box of tissues on his desk and knew better than to say anything while I used them. 40 years. Nobody in that building had ever stopped my hand before. "Come again?" I said. I was still smiling. I actually laughed a little, the way you do. Marcus didn't laugh. He slid the signature card out from under my pen, slowly, the way you'd take something from a sleeping man, and he set it face down in the desk like it was something indecent. He was a man I'd known casually for years, 50-something, gray at the temples, the kind of banker small towns still get if they're lucky, the kind who calls you by name and means it. He was always calm, always pressed, always polite. He was polite now, too. But something had gone wrong behind his eyes. "There's a restriction on the account," he said. "I'm not able to discuss the details." "A restriction," I said, "on my account?" "Yes, sir." "The account I've had since 1984. "Yes, sir." I waited for more. There wasn't any more. And that's when I saw him do the thing I would replay 1,000 times in the weeks that followed, lying awake in a bed that had been half empty for 3 years. His eyes left mine. They moved sideways to my grandson sitting in the chair next to me, and they stayed there 1 beat too long. Just one. Then they came back to me, and whatever had been in them was folded up and put away, the way a man closes a drawer he doesn't want you to see into. Caleb, 22 years old, my son David's boy. The one who shows up at my place on Saturday mornings and fixes things I haven't asked him to fix. Just that morning, that very morning, I'd found him on my front porch with my own toolbox open beside him, replacing the step that had been groaning under my foot since spring. Didn't say a word about it, just did it, the way he does, and then came inside and ate my eggs and asked if I was ready to go. It was his idea, this trip to the bank. His idea to add his name to my checking account so he could help me with the bills if anything ever happened. His idea to come Thursday morning, early, before it gets busy, Grandpa. So when Marcus refused my signature, I turned to Caleb, expecting to see my own confusion looking back at me, expecting him to sit up, to say, "Hang on, what is this? My grandfather's been banking here his whole life." That's what I would have done at his age. That's what anyone would have done. Caleb didn't do that. Caleb exhaled. I want to be exact about this because it matters. It matters more than anything else that happened in that bank. He didn't gasp. He didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. My grandson let out a long, slow breath through his nose, quiet, controlled, almost private, and his shoulders came down half an inch, like a man who has been carrying something heavy up a long flight of stairs and has finally been allowed to set it down. Relief. That's what it was. I didn't have a name for it in the moment, but I have one now. Okay, Caleb said softly. Not to Marcus, not really to me, just, okay. I looked back and forth between the two of them, the banker and the boy, and I had the strangest feeling of being the only man in the room who didn't know what the meeting was about. Marcus straightened the papers on his desk that didn't need straightening. Caleb took out his phone and started typing something, and then stopped and deleted it, and started again, and deleted that too, his thumb hovering over the screen like it was afraid of the glass. I remember thinking, who is he writing to? I remember thinking it the way you think about a fly on the window, a small wrongness, nothing more. Marcus, I said, and I kept my voice friendly because that's how I was raised. Help me understand. I'm not asking to move any money. I'm not asking for a loan. I want to add my grandson's name to my checking account, and you've known me for 20 years. I have, Marcus said. That's true. Then what's the problem? He looked at me for a long moment, and I swear to you, there was something in that man's face that wanted out. Something pressing against the inside of him like water against a dam. His jaw worked once. His hand came up and adjusted a stapler an inch to the left. When he finally spoke, his voice was as flat and careful as a legal document, and I understood, without understanding anything at all, that every word had been chosen the way a man chooses his footing on ice. Mr. Hayes, I am not able to discuss the details of the restriction. I'm sorry. I truly am. I truly am. Bankers don't say that. Bankers say, we apologize for the inconvenience. This was something else. This was a man apologizing to me personally for something he knew and I didn't, and it made the hair stand up on my arms in a warm office on a sunny Thursday morning in June. Beside me, Caleb had gone still. His phone was dark in his hand now. He was staring at a spot on the carpet about 3 feet in front of his shoes, and his face, his open, easy, 22-year-old face, the face I'd watched grow up across 10,000 Sunday dinners, had closed like a door. Not guilty, not scared, just braced. The way his grandmother used to look in the oncologist's waiting room in those last months. The look of someone waiting for a thing they already know is coming. I picked up the pen again. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. 71 years of believing that my name, written in my own hand, was worth something in any building in this town. Marcus looked at the pen, then at me, then, one more time, quick as a bird, at my grandson. And nobody in that room said a word. I'll tell you now what I couldn't have told you then, sitting in that chair with my useless pen and my 40 years of good standing. I thought I was the man everyone was worried about. The old widower, the one they hushed their voices around. I thought the strange thing that morning was the bank. It took me 2 weeks to understand the strange thing was standing right beside me. 3 days earlier, my biggest problem was a porch step. I want you to understand what my life looked like that week, because I need you to see it the way I saw it, before I knew anything, when the world was still simple. I got up at 6, the way I have every morning for 50 years, because a body that taught high school shop for 3.5 decades doesn't know how to sleep in. I made coffee in the same pot Ellen bought us in 1991, and I drank it out of her mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle that she refused to throw away because, she said, a chip means it's been loved, Walter. 3 years she's been gone, and I still take that mug down from the shelf like it might break if I look at it wrong. I did the crossword at the kitchen table. I got stuck on 14 across, 6 letters, deliberate deception, and I left it blank, which tells you something about how the universe likes its little jokes. And around 9, I heard a truck in my driveway. I didn't have to look to know it was Caleb. Nobody else's truck sounds like that. His father's old Silverado, the one David handed down to him when he got his license, with the tailpipe that's been threatening to fall off since the Obama administration. By the time I got to the front window, my grandson was already crouched on the porch with my toolbox open beside him, prying up the step that had been groaning at me since April. I hadn't asked him to do it. That's the thing about Caleb you have to understand. He doesn't announce. He doesn't ask if you need help, because asking would mean making you admit you need it. He just appears, and things get fixed. His grandmother used to say he was born 40 years old. I opened the door and stood there in my slippers. "Morning, Grandpa," he said, without looking up. He had a nail between his teeth, the way I taught him never to do. "You know I was getting around to that." "Sure you were." "I was letting it season." He smiled around the nail. He's got his mother's smile, Maria's smile, God rest her, the kind that starts slow and then gets away from the person wearing it. He set the new board in place, and I watched him check it twice before he drove a single nail, and I felt that particular warmth in the chest that grandfathers don't talk about because there aren't good words for it. Measure twice. Somebody was listening all those years. I made him eggs. He ate like a 22-year-old, which is to say, like the eggs had wronged him personally. We talked about the Tigers' bullpen, which was a tragedy, and the marina where he works part-time, and whether he was going to finish out his classes at the community college. He got quiet at that last one, just a beat, just a flicker. And then he asked me a question that I answered without thinking, the way you answer questions from people you love. "Grandpa," he said, pushing a piece of toast around his plate, "how much do you actually keep in savings? Like, actually?" I laughed. "Why, you planning to rob me?" "I'm serious." "About 61,000, I said, give or take. Your grandmother's doing, not mine. 30 years of squirreling. She called it the when it matters money." I tapped the table. "Hasn't mattered yet." He nodded, slow, looking at his toast. I thought, and I'm being honest with you about what I thought he was impressed. I thought maybe he was doing the math young men do, about how long it takes to save anything on a paycheck. That's what I thought. Remember that. Remember how easy it was to think it. It was over sandwiches, a couple hours later, that he made the ask. I could tell it was coming before it came. He'd gotten quiet again, and he had that look, the rehearsed look, the one kids get when they've practiced something in the truck on the way over. He set down his sandwich, and he wiped his hands on his jeans even though they weren't dirty, and he said, "Grandpa, I've been thinking about something, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything." "That bad?" "No, it's just—" He took a breath. "You're out here alone. And you're fine, I know you're fine, but I think maybe you should add me to your checking account. Joint, or whatever they call it. So if you ever needed help with bills, or if anything ever happened, I could just handle things. Without a bunch of lawyers and waiting." He said it fast, all in one line, like a man stepping off a diving board before he can change his mind. And then he watched me. He watched me very carefully, my grandson did. I mistook it for nervousness. There are so many things I mistook. Here is the truth about what happened in my heart in that moment. Nothing complicated. No alarm bells. No little voice. This was the boy who fixed my porch without being asked. This was the kid who drove 2 hours back from school when my furnace died in January and slept on my couch until the part came in. If you had lined up every person on this earth and asked me to pick the one I'd trust with everything I had, I would have picked the 2 men in my family, and Caleb first. And I wouldn't have needed a second to think about it. "Well," I said, "I think that's about the most sensible thing anybody said to me all year." He blinked. "Yeah? Your grandmother would have suggested it herself if she were here. She never trusted me to handle things alone, rightly." He laughed, but it came out strange, short, and a little airless, like laughing hurt. And then he said quickly, "Okay, good. Then let's go Thursday. Thursday morning, early, before it gets busy. 9, when they open." "There a rush?" "No rush," he said. Mornings are better, that's all." That afternoon, while I was rinsing plates, his phone buzzed and he stepped out onto the new porch step to take the call. I could see him through the kitchen window. 2 minutes, maybe 3. He kept his back to the house. When he came in, I asked, casual as anything, "Who was that?" "Nobody," he said. "Work thing." He doesn't lie well, my grandson. His ears go pink. I noticed, and I let it go, because the boy is 22 and entitled to a life, and probably it was a girl, and none of my business. That's what I told myself while I dried the plates. None of my business. So, Thursday, 9 o'clock. Marcus Ellison's hand resting on mine, and the signature card face down on the desk, and my grandson exhaling like a man set free. You know now where I was sitting. Let me tell you how it ended. I asked Marcus one more time, what kind of restriction could sit on an account for 40 years' worth of nothing but good behavior? He didn't answer that. Instead, he opened his drawer and took out one of the bank's appointment cards, and he uncapped his pen, and he said something that pulled the temperature of the room down 5 degrees. "Mr. Hayes, I'd like you to come back and see me, Monday, if you can." He paused, and his eyes did not go to Caleb this time. They very deliberately did not, which was somehow worse. "Alone, if you're comfortable with that. Bring your photo ID, and bring copies of any powers of attorney you've executed." The words just sat there on the desk between us. "Any what?" "Powers of attorney, sir. Any documents where you've authorized another person to act on your behalf, financially." I actually smiled again. The second time that morning I'd smiled at something that should have frightened me. "Marcus, I've never signed a power of attorney in my life. Ellen and I talked about doing wills after she got sick, and we did the wills, and that was the whole of it. There's no such document. There couldn't be." Marcus didn't answer. "I need you to sit with that the way I had to." A banker. A careful, courteous, 22 years behind that desk banker heard a customer say, "There is no such document." And he said nothing at all. He looked at me the way you look at a man standing in a house he doesn't know is on fire. Then he bent his head and wrote the appointment time on the little card. Monday, 10 a.m., and I watched him do it. His handwriting was neat. Banker's handwriting always is. But his hand, as he slid that card across the desk to me, was not quite steady. Monday morning, 10 o'clock. I walked into Harbor Community Bank alone, the way Marcus had asked. I'd spent the weekend the way a man spends a weekend when the ground under him has started to move, going through my shoebox again, staring at that email address on my notepad that was almost mine but wasn't, sleeping in 20-minute installments. I hadn't called Caleb. He'd texted twice. I hadn't answered that either. I told myself it was because I didn't know what to say. The truth is, I was afraid of what I might hear in his voice, now that I'd started listening differently. Donna was at the teller window when I came in. Donna's been cashing my checks since her kids were in my shop class. She looked up when the door chimed, and she gave me a smile I'd seen 10,000 times, except this one didn't hold. It slipped at the edges, and she looked down at her drawer, and something about that small failure of a smile frightened me more than anything Marcus had said on Thursday. Marcus met me at his office door. He shook my hand, held it maybe a half-second longer than a banker's handshake needs to go, and then he did a thing I'd never once seen him do in all my years in that building. He closed the door. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes. Please." The office was the same one where I'd signed Ellen's funeral arrangements. Same desk. Same framed photograph of the harbor at sunrise. Same box of tissues, I noticed, sitting on the corner where it had always sat, and I remember thinking, he keeps those stocked for a reason. This is a room where people find things out. Marcus sat across from me. He put his hands flat on the desk, one on top of the other, and for a moment he just looked at them, the way a man looks at his hands when he's deciding how to use them. "Mr. Hayes, before we start, I need you to understand my position. There are things I am not permitted to discuss, not because I don't want to, because the law doesn't allow me to. I need you to hear that word, permitted, and hear everything I'm not saying inside it." "All right," I said, though it wasn't. "But—" He raised one finger, careful as a chess move. "Your own records belong to you. Every statement, every document in your file. You have an absolute right to see anything with your name on it. So that is what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to give you your records, and you're going to read them." He turned to the printer behind him, and it began to hum, and pages started sliding into the tray. And I want to tell you about the sound of that printer, because it's the sound I hear now when I can't sleep. A soft, mechanical whisper, page after page after page. It ran longer than it should have. I remember counting 8, 9, 10 sheets and thinking, my account doesn't do anything. I'm a retired school teacher. What could possibly take 10 pages? Marcus squared the stack, tapped it twice on the desk, and slid it across to me the way you'd slide something across to a man you're sorry for. "Take your time," he said. "There's no rush in this room." The first page was February, normal, my pension deposit, my utilities, the hardware store, $61,340.19 sitting in savings, right where Ellen left it. I felt my shoulders come down. I actually thought, for about 4 seconds I actually thought, this is all a mistake. Some computer somewhere hiccuped, and by lunch I'll be laughing about this. Then I turned to March. March 14th. Withdrawal. Agent on behalf of account holder. $4,000. I read it twice, 3 times. My finger went to the line like touching it might change it. "I didn't make this withdrawal," I said. Marcus said nothing. His face said, "Keep reading." April 9th, $6,500. April 30th, $5,000. May 21st, $9,000. The numbers climbed the page like a fever chart, bigger each time and closer together, the way a bad habit works, the way a man dying of thirst drinks. June. July. I stopped saying I didn't make this somewhere around the 4th entry because my mouth had gone to sandpaper and because it was becoming horribly clear that everyone in the room already knew. At the bottom of the last page, there was a balance. I made myself look at it. $14,040.19. I did the arithmetic the way I've done arithmetic my whole life, in my head, in pencil-straight columns, and the answer came out the same every way I ran it. $47,300. Gone. Since March. I need to try to explain what that number was, because it was not money. It was 30 years of Ellen packing her own lunch. It was her taking the substitute teaching jobs nobody wanted, summers, so there'd be a little extra. It was every birthday she said, "Don't get me anything, Walter. Put it in the account." It was her voice on a Tuesday in the kitchen, the "when it matters" money. "Walter, don't you touch it." And her laugh after she said it. Somebody had been carrying my wife out of that bank in envelopes, $4,000 and $6,000 and $9,000 at a time, for 5 months, while I did crosswords. My hands were on the paper. I watched them like they belonged to somebody else. They were not shaking. That surprised me. They were just very, very still, the way the shop goes still after something breaks. "How?" I said. It wasn't a whole question. Marcus understood it anyway. He opened a folder. It had been sitting at his elbow the entire time, waiting, and I understood now that this whole morning had been arranged in a sequence, that Marcus had thought hard about the order in which a 71-year-old man should learn things. And he took out a document and turned it to face me. "This is the instrument on file," he said quietly. "A durable power of attorney. Executed and notarized this past March. Under it, the named agent has legal authority to transact on your accounts. The bank honored it because, on its face, Mr. Hayes, it's valid." I looked at it. "Durable power of attorney," it said across the top, in the confident typeface of documents that ruin lives. Paragraphs of language I half followed. A notary's stamp, embossed, official-looking, some name out of Saginaw I'd never heard. And at the bottom, on the line marked Principal, my signature. I want to slow down here because this was the worst moment of my life up to that point, and it did not arrive like a blow. It arrived like recognition, like seeing your own face in a window you didn't know was there. Because I know my signature the way I know my own breathing. I've signed it for 55 years. The W with the long tail that hooks back under. Ellen used to tease me about it, said I signed like I was underlining myself. The cramped little later that follows. The haze that starts strong and gives up halfway. It was all there, all of it. The tail, the cramp, the surrender in the Y. "That's my hand," I heard myself say. "That's whoever did this." I leaned closer. The room had gotten very small. "It's good. It's very good." And then a colder thought arrived, walking slowly, taking its time. You don't forge a signature this well from a bank card. You forge it from birthday cards, from checks on the kitchen table, from permission slips and Christmas tags. You forge it from a lifetime of watching it happen. Whoever did this had been close enough to love me. "Marcus," I said, and my voice came out level, which is the strangest thing, that shop teacher voice that used to settle a room full of 16-year-olds with bandsaws. "Who is the agent? Who did this paper make legal?" Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and then, gently, the way you'd turn back a sheet, he turned the page. Agent designation. The principal hereby appoints David M. Hayes. David Michael Hayes. My son. I don't know how long I sat there. Marcus will know. I never asked him. I know the harbor photograph was over his left shoulder, and I stared at it, at the little boats, and I thought, this is exactly what I thought, in exactly this order. I thought about David, at 7 years old, standing on a chair at my workbench, holding a hammer with both hands. I thought about teaching him to write his name, his tongue out the side of his mouth, at that same kitchen table where the checks and birthday cards live. I thought, he learned my signature the same place he learned his own. I thought about him at Ellen's funeral, standing at the graveside in a suit that didn't fit him anymore, and how I'd put my hand on his shoulder and felt him holding himself together like a cracked casting. 48 years of being that boy's father rearranged themselves in that office, and nobody heard a sound. "It's not the grandson," I finally said, stupidly. "It's the only thing I could find." I thought all weekend, I thought. I can't speak to what anyone thought, Mr. Hayes. I pulled the statements back toward me. I don't know why, some instinct to hold on to something, and that's when I saw it. That's when the morning, which I believed had already done its worst, reached out and did one thing more. A transfer back in April. $6,200. And in the little memo field, where the description goes, 6 words in the bank's plain gray type, Caleb, CMU, balance. Caleb. Central Michigan University. My grandson's tuition. My grandson, who had asked me, over eggs, exactly how much I kept in savings, who had marched me to this bank on Thursday morning to put his name beside mine, whose ears go pink when he lies. "Not one of them," said the cold voice, the one that had been walking slowly toward me all morning. "Both of them." I don't remember thanking Marcus. I don't remember the lobby, or whether Donna looked at me, or the door chime, or the sun. I remember being in my truck in the parking lot with the engine off and my phone in my hand, and on the screen 2 names, one above the other, in a contact list I'd built out of love. David, Caleb. My thumb hovered over one, then the other, then neither. I put the phone face down on the seat where Ellen used to sit, and I started the engine. I did not drive to my son's house. I want that understood. Every instinct I had was howling at me to drive straight to David's door and put those bank statements on his kitchen table and watch his face while he read them. 50 years ago, I would have. 30 years ago, maybe even 10. But I taught shop for 34 years, and if that job teaches you one thing, it's this. When something breaks, you don't start swinging tools at it. You look at it first. You look at it for a long time, from every side, until you understand how it broke. Because how it broke tells you everything. So I looked. Tuesday morning I drove out to Industrial Road, where David's shop sits, Hayes Heating and Cooling, the sign he was so proud of when he painted it himself in 2009, blue letters on white. Because blue means cold and trustworthy, Pop. I read it in a magazine. I parked across the street at the gas station, bought a coffee I didn't want, and I sat in my truck like some retired man with nowhere to be, which I suppose is exactly what I was. I hadn't been out there since Christmas, and I'm going to tell you what I saw, and as I tell you, I want you to ask yourself the question I was asking myself, which was, how long has this been in front of me? The shop has 3 bays. 2 of them were dark, not closed for the morning dark, dark, the kind where dust gets a vote. There used to be 3 service trucks lined up out front, white with the blue lettering, and David used to have them washed every Friday because nobody hires a dirty furnace man. There were 2 trucks now. One of them had a hand-lettered "For Sale" sign in the windshield, with a phone number I knew by heart because it was my son's cell. He was selling his trucks. My boy was selling his trucks. Through the office window I could see him at his desk, He didn't know I was there. I was just another pickup at the gas pumps. And there is something almost unbearable about watching someone you love when they don't know they're being watched, because you see them the way the world sees them, without the face they put on for you. David was sitting in front of a desk buried in paper. Not working papers. Piles. The kind of piles that grow on a desk when every envelope that comes in is a small emergency, and opening them has become an act of courage. While I watched, he picked one up, looked at it, and set it down without opening it. Then he took off his reading glasses and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and just stayed like that. 10 seconds. 15. A big man in a work shirt, alone in a glass box, holding his own head like it might come apart. He's 48. From across that road, in that light, he looked like his grandfather. And I sat there with my coffee going cold, and I did not feel what I had expected to feel. I had driven out there to look at a thief. What I was looking at was a drowning man. And those bank statements in the folder on my passenger seat didn't stop being true. Not $1 of it stopped being true. But a second truth pulled up alongside the first one and sat there, and the two of them together were heavier than either one alone. When did the plant close? October? The whole town felt it. 400 jobs. I remember saying to somebody at the diner, "Thank God David does residential too." I remember saying it, and then moving on to the weather. His biggest contracts were commercial. I knew that. I knew that, the way you know things you never bother to think about. And sitting there, watching my son not open his mail, a memory came for me. It had been standing out in the hallway of my mind for 3 years, patient as a bill collector, and that morning, it finally let itself in. The week after Ellen's funeral. The casseroles were still coming. That's how I date it. We were still in the casserole period. And David had stopped by, alone, no Caleb. He'd stood around my kitchen too long. I remember being aware of it, even through the fog I was in, the way he kept picking things up and setting them down. Ellen's reading glasses were still on the windowsill. Nobody had been able to move them. He'd said, and I can hear it now, every word in his voice, which had his mother's softness in it that day. He'd said, "Things are a little tight at the shop, Pop, with winter coming and the way things are." And he waited. I want to be honest about what I did, because this whole story falls apart if I'm not honest. I was 70 years old and 8 days into being a widower, and I did not want to talk about money. But that's an excuse, and I've had months now to sand this memory down to bare wood, and here is what's under the excuse. Even on my best day, whole, rested, happy, I would have said the same thing. Because it's what my father said, and his father, and it is carved into the men of this family like initials in a school desk. I said, "Money between family gets complicated, Davy." That's all. 6 words. I said it kindly. I said it the way you hand somebody a proverb instead of your hand. And I watched my son. I watched it happen, and filed it away as nothing. I watched him nod, twice, small nods, and look at his mother's reading glasses on the windowsill and say, "Nah, forget it. It's nothing. You've got enough going on." And he never asked again. Not that winter, not the next one. Not when the plant closed. Not once in 3 years, my son, sinking, never asked again. Because I had answered his question before he'd finished getting the courage up to ask it. I sat in that gas station parking lot, and I said it out loud to the empty truck, to Ellen's side of the bench seat. He asked me, and I quoted him a proverb. The engine ticked. Across the road, David finally opened one of his envelopes. Now, none of that told me how a forged document gets a notary's stamp on it. And that question had been bothering me in a different part of my brain. The mechanical part. The part that can't rest until it knows how the thing was built. A notary is supposed to be a wall. You sit in front of them, you show identification, they watch your hand make the signature. They log it in a journal. That's the entire job. I never sat in front of anyone, so either the wall had a door in it or somebody had climbed over. Wednesday, I called Ernie Kowalczyk. Ernie played poker at my table every other Thursday for 20 years, and for 30 years before that, he worked in the county clerk's office. And there is nothing about stamps, seals, licenses, and filings in this state that Ernie doesn't know or can't find out with 2 phone calls. I told him only what he needed, a notary's name and commission number off a document. Could he tell me if the commission was in good standing? I didn't say what document. Ernie's played cards with me long enough not to ask. He called back that evening. Walt, your notary is real, commissioned, technically current, but here's your flavor. He's a mobile notary, works out of Saginaw, signing agent, does loan documents, drives around with his stamp in his glove box. Volume business. They get paid by the appointment, so the fast ones get the work. A pause. I could hear him flipping a page. And I made a second call. He's been written up once already. Complaint last year. Incomplete journal. Notaries are supposed to log every act, every ID they check. His journal's got holes in it you could drive a service truck through. State never pulled his commission. They send a letter, he says sorry, everybody moves on. So a man like that, I said slowly, if somebody handed him a driver's license and a paper and a fee, a man like that stamps first and remembers never, Ernie said. Walt, you in some kind of trouble? No, I said. No, I'm just settling a bet. So there it was, the whole machine laid out on my workbench. Not a bank's failure. The bank was the one that caught it. This was built to go around the bank. A statement address quietly switched in February, so no paper would land in my mailbox. A rented stamp from a man in Saginaw who doesn't look up from his journal. My own signature, learned at my own kitchen table over 48 years of birthdays. Every piece chosen by somebody who knew exactly where I don't look. It was engineering. Sloppy, desperate engineering, but engineering. And I had taught the man who built it how to measure. I was still sitting with that at my kitchen table, the folder squared in front of me, and the light going orange in the window, when my phone buzzed against the wood. Caleb, did you go back to the bank? Please talk to me before you do anything. Please, Grandpa. I read it 4 times. And I want to tell you exactly how those words looked to me that evening, with a $6,200 tuition payment sitting in a folder 6 inches from my hand. They did not look like a frightened boy. They looked like a young man checking on a loose end. Before you do anything. Twice, please. And every please looked like a lock being tested. I typed 1 word back and sent it. Tonight. Then I got up and I went to the shelf in the living room and I took down Ellen's photograph, the one from the dunes at Sleeping Bear, 1987, her hair going every direction, and her hand half raised, laughing, telling me not to take it, and I held it in both hands for a while, the way you hold something when you're asking permission. Before tonight, there was one more thing I needed. I had the what, and I had most of the how, but I did not yet know the size and shape of the choice that was coming for me. And a man should see a choice coming before it arrives at his kitchen table wearing his grandson's face. So at 4:45, I drove back to the bank. Harbor Community closes at 5 on weekdays. The lot was nearly empty when I pulled in. Donna's Buick, a couple others, the flag out front snapping in the wind coming off the lake. I hadn't called ahead. But when I came through the door, Marcus was already standing outside his office, as if he'd been expecting me all afternoon. And I suppose in a way he had been. There are men who understand that certain conversations ripen on their own schedule. Marcus Ellison is one of them. "Mr. Hayes?" He glanced at the clock, then at the last teller counting her drawer. "Give me 2 minutes." He locked the front door behind the last customer himself. Then he showed me into the office, and he did something small that I noticed the way I notice everything now. He tilted the blinds half shut, not closed, half, enough that Donna, or anyone, could still see 2 men sitting across a desk, not enough to read their faces. 22 years of practice in exactly how private a private conversation ought to look. "You've read the statements," he said, sitting. "I've read everything. I've done more than read." I set my folder on his desk, but didn't open it. "Marcus, I know who. I believe I know how. I even understand some of the why, God help me. What I don't know is what happens next. And I have the feeling that's the part of this you've been waiting to tell me. The part you can tell me." He nodded slowly, and something in his posture changed, loosened, a half degree. On Monday he had been a man walking a wire. Tonight he was still on the wire, but he'd walked it enough times now to talk while he did it. "Let me start with how this began on our side," he said, "because I think you're owed that, and it's yours to know. In May, one of our tellers processed a large withdrawal presented by an agent under power of attorney. Third one in about 8 weeks. She could have run it and gone to lunch. The paperwork was in order. That's the whole point of the paperwork. Instead, she came to my office. He turned a pen over in his fingers once. "Mr. Hayes, someone in this building has known your signature for 20 years. Watched it slow down a little, same as everyone's does. Knows it the way you know a neighbor's walk. She looked at that file, and she looked at what was moving through that account, and she said to me, 'This isn't him. He'd have come in himself. He always comes in himself.'" He didn't say Donna's name. He didn't have to. I thought about her smile slipping at the edges Monday morning, and I had to look at the harbor photograph for a moment. "Tell her," I started. "I won't tell her anything," Marcus said, gently. "But you bank here, Mr. Hayes. You'll have your chances." So she came to you. Then what? Then I did my job, and my job from that point forward is very specifically laid out, and some of it I can describe to you, and some of it I can't. Here's what I can. When a bank believes an older customer may be the target of financial exploitation, we don't get to treat that as a hunch we keep in a drawer. There are things we're required to do. One of them is this. We notified Adult Protective Services. That's the state. That's mandatory in situations like this, not a judgment call I made about your family. He paused to let me absorb it. You're going to get a phone call from a caseworker, probably this week. A woman or a man is going to ask you questions that will feel intrusive. Whether anyone controls your money, whether you feel safe, whether anyone's pressured you to sign things. I want you to hear this from me tonight, so that when the phone rings, you don't feel ambushed. They're not accusing you of being feeble. It's a welfare check on your finances. Answer honestly, and it goes fine. And the parts you can't describe? Marcus set the pen down and folded his hands. There's a category of things banks do quietly when money moves in ways it shouldn't. Reporting that goes up and out of this building to people whose job is to look at it. I'm not allowed to tell you whether any such thing exists in your case. I'm not allowed to tell anyone, not you, not the person the money went to, not my own wife. That's federal, and it's absolute, and I'd lose more than my job. He held my eyes. So when you ask me what I've done, Mr. Hayes, understand that my silence is not emptiness. It's the shape of the thing I can't show you. I sat with that. A locked box on the table between us, and him telling me plainly that the box was there, and that it was not empty, and that neither of us would ever open it together. All right, I said. Now the restriction. You stopped my hand Thursday. There's something specific you froze. What? And here Marcus took a breath, the breath of a man arriving at the paragraph he'd been building toward all along. 9 days ago, he said, a transfer request was submitted against your savings account by the attorney in fact, electronically. For the remaining balance, essentially, $12,600. The room got very quiet. 12-6. The last of it. The last of her. 9 days ago, I repeated. 9 days ago was before the porch step, before the eggs, before Grandpa, how much do you actually keep in savings? State law gives us a tool, Marcus went on, even and careful. When we have reasonable belief that a disbursement is connected to the exploitation of an older adult, we're permitted to delay it, not cancel, delay. We hold the money in place while the people who need to look at it, look at it. That's the restriction on your account. That's why I couldn't take your signature Thursday. I couldn't add a party to an account sitting under an active hold. And I couldn't tell you why, because telling you why walks straight into everything I just told you I can't discuss. How long does the hold last? That's the part you need to hear clearly. He leaned forward slightly. It's temporary. The statute gives us a window, days, Mr. Hayes, not months. And then the hold expires, and that transfer either completes or it doesn't, based on the documents in the file. And right now, the file contains a notarized power of attorney that is, on its face, valid. He let that sit. So it comes down to you. You are the principal. If you tell me that document is genuine, that you signed it, that you authorized your agent, then I have no legal basis to stand in the way. The hold lifts. The $12,600 goes where it was sent. And if I tell you it's forged, then you'll sign an affidavit of forgery, a sworn statement under penalty of perjury that the signature on that instrument is not yours and you never granted that authority. The document dies. The transfer dies. The account is restored to your sole control. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower, not softer, lower, the way a doctor's voice drops when he gets to the part that matters. But I won't dress it up for you. The moment you sign that affidavit, this stops being a family matter. It becomes a fraud, documented, sworn to, in a federally regulated institution. It goes to people whose job is to act on it, and neither you nor I control where it goes from there. There's a clock on it either way, Mr. Hayes. You have days to decide which paper you're going to put your name on. There it was, the whole choice, sitting on the desk in the half-light. Lie and lose the last of Ellen to a forged page that would go on being legal. Tell the truth and send the machinery of the law after my own son. I stood to go. My legs were older than they'd been an hour before. I had my hand on the door when Marcus spoke again, and his voice had changed, off the wire now, just a man in a chair at the end of a long day. Mr. Hayes, one more thing. Not the banker talking. I turned. I've refused a lot of signatures in 22 years. Bounced checks, expired IDs, holds, liens, all of it. And I can tell you what people do when you stop their hand. They argue. They get loud. They demand a supervisor. They threaten to move their accounts. They tell me their lawyer's name. Every one of them, every time, because being refused offends people. It's supposed to. He looked at me steadily. Your grandson didn't say a word Thursday. Didn't argue. Didn't ask a single question. He sat in that chair, and he let out a breath, and his shoulders came down. And I've been in this business long enough to know that look. I've only ever seen it on people who were hoping to be caught. A pause. Or hoping someone else would be. The floor moved under me, quietly, the way ice moves. Before it gets busy, Grandpa. The phone he kept typing on and erasing, in case anything ever happened. 20 years of banking told this man something my own eyes had looked straight at and misread. For what it's worth, Marcus said as I stood there in the doorway, the day you two came in together, that request, adding him to the account, a new party means a full file review. It's what made everything visible, Mr. Hayes, all of it. If he hadn't brought you here. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I stood in that doorway with my hand on the frame, and behind my eyes the whole story picked itself up, every piece of it, and quietly began to move. Caleb's truck pulled into my driveway at 7, and I listened to that failing tailpipe come up the road for a quarter-mile, the way I'd listened to it 100 times before, with nothing in my chest but gladness. Tonight, I stood at the kitchen window and watched him get out, and I watched him stand beside the truck for a moment, with his hand still on the door, looking at my house the way a man looks at deep water before he goes in. Then he squared himself up and came to the door, and I let him in. I'd thought hard about how to do this. I want you to know that. I'd had all afternoon driving home from the bank with Marcus's words writing in the passenger seat, and I had turned it over the way I turn everything over. I could put the whole folder in front of him. I could start with the forged signature, or the notary, or the $12,600 sitting frozen in a vault with a clock running on it. I could raise my voice, which I have done maybe 5 times in my life, and which works precisely because of that. I did none of it. I taught teenagers for 34 years, and here is what I know about the truth and young men. You cannot pull it out of them. You can only make a space quiet enough for it to walk into on its own. So, I had set the kitchen table. 2 cups of coffee, which neither of us would touch. And in the middle of the table, face up, squared to the wood grain, 1 single sheet of paper. Not the power of attorney, not the statements. The transfer memo. April 9th, $6,200. Caleb, CMU balance. He came into the kitchen. He saw me. He saw the table. He saw the paper. And I said, as gently as I have ever said anything, "Tell me about your tuition, son." I have seen dams fail, not in person, in films, in the documentaries Ellen used to fall asleep to. And it's never the way you'd think. It isn't an explosion. It's a seep first. A dark line down the concrete that's been there for weeks, that everybody's been walking past. And then the line widens, and then all at once it isn't a line anymore. Caleb didn't cry, not at first. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly, like his body weighed more than it used to. And he looked at that piece of paper for a long, long time. His jaw was working. His ears had gone red, not pink, red. And I watched my grandson try 3 times to start a sentence. "Grandpa, Stop. The thing is, stop. I've been trying to." And then he put both hands flat on my kitchen table, and he pressed down like the table might get away from him. And he said, in a voice that came out about 10 years younger than he is, "How long have you known?" "Since Monday." "Now I want to hear it from you, from the beginning." And Caleb, I waited until he looked up at me. "Slow. We've got all night, and I've got nothing left to be shocked by. So just tell it." I was wrong about that last part, but he told it. "April," he said. For me, it started in April. I got an email from the bursar's office at Central, thanking me for the payment. $6,200, account paid in full. Thank you, Mr. Hayes." He laughed, 1 syllable, no joy in it anywhere. I read it 4 times. I thought it was a scam, honestly, one of those phishing things, because I was 2 payments behind, Grandpa. I was about to get dropped from fall registration. I've been picking up every shift at the marina I could get, and it wasn't even close. "You never told me you were behind." "I know." He looked at the table. "I know I didn't." "Go on." "So I asked Dad, that night, at dinner, just, 'Hey, the school says my balance is paid. Do you know anything about that?' And he didn't even look up from his plate. He said he'd been setting a little aside, said business was picking up." Caleb's voice caught on something. "Grandpa, I work summers out of that shop. I answer the phone when he's on a job. Business wasn't picking up. Business was, I'd watched him sell the 3rd truck in March. I'd seen the mail. He hides it, but we live in the same house. You can't hide everything." And he sat there and told me business was picking up, and he ate his dinner, and his ears. Caleb stopped. His hand came up halfway toward his own ear and dropped. "We don't lie well," he said quietly. "Any of us. It's the ears. Mom used to say she could referee the whole family off our ears." The clock over the stove ticked. I didn't fill the silence. Neither did he, for a while. "So I looked," he finally said. "You remember last winter when I set up your online banking? The passwords, the login, all of it. You wrote everything in that little notebook, and I told you to keep it out of your desk drawer, and you put it in your desk drawer anyway." "I did." "I wasn't snooping, Grandpa, I swear to you. I need you to believe that part. $6,200 appears out of nowhere, the same spring my dad starts selling trucks. And there's exactly one place in this family where $6,200 exists." His voice dropped. "So one Saturday when I was here fixing your gutter, you were out at Ernie's, and I logged in. 2 minutes. That's all it took. 2 minutes, and I'm looking at March 14th. $4,000, agent on behalf of account holder. And April, and I just sat there at your desk, in your house, looking at it." He was crying now. Not the way people cry in movies. It was worse than that, quieter. His eyes just kept filling, and he kept blinking it back and going on, because he'd decided he was going to get through this, and I watched my grandson be brave in a way I wouldn't wish on anyone. "Agent," I said. "You knew what that word meant?" "Not at first. I looked it up. Power of attorney. And I thought, okay, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe you gave Dad some kind of... But you'd have told me. And anyway, you'd never..." He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, fast, angry at it. "So I looked for the document, and I found it. In his truck, Grandpa. Folded up in the console of his truck, under the napkins. A copy of it. And I'm sitting in the marina parking lot on my lunch break reading this thing, and I get to the bottom, and there's your signature." He looked straight at me for the first time since he'd sat down. And I knew. Right away. Not because it looked wrong. It looked perfect, that's the thing. It looked exactly right. The W, the tail, all of it. But Grandpa, I've watched you sign birthday cards my whole life. Every card, every Christmas tag, right there. He pointed at my kitchen counter, at the drawer where the pens live. Right there at that counter. And I know how you sign. You breathe out first. Every time. You breathe out, and then you sign. And I looked at that paper, and all I could think was, he was never in the room. Nobody watched him breathe out. It's stupid. I can't explain it better than that. I just knew. "It's not stupid," I said. My own voice had gone rough. "It's the best explanation of a forgery I've ever heard." And then came the part that I will carry for the rest of my life. Because up to here, it was a story about discovery. What came next was a story about 6 weeks of being 22 years old and utterly alone with the worst thing you've ever known. "I tried to tell you," he said. "I want you to know I tried. 3 times. "When?" "First time, I drove to Dad's office. A Thursday night, he was doing books late. I stood outside the door. I had my hand up to knock, and through the window I could see him. And he had Mom's picture on the desk. He keeps it by the phone. And I stood there with my hand up, and I thought, what am I going to say? What are the words, Grandpa? Dad, I know you're stealing from Grandpa? He raised me. By himself. He sat with Mom every single night for 2 years. He'd come home from jobs and shower and drive straight to the hospital and sit there doing invoices in the chair so she wouldn't wake up alone. And I'm going to stand in his office and call him a thief? He shook his head slowly. I put my hand down and I drove home. And the second time? 2 a.m, about 3 weeks ago. I had my phone out. I typed it maybe 30 times. To you, to him. I'd type it, and it would sit there on the screen looking insane, and I'd delete it. He gave that one-syllable laugh again. You noticed. At the bank. I saw you notice. I was doing it right there in the chair, typing and deleting. You must have thought. Never mind what I thought, I said. God forgive me. The third time. He looked at the table. He looked at the exact spot on the table. Right here, 2 Sundays ago. You made pot roast. I sat in this chair the whole meal with it in my throat, the whole thing, ready. And you asked me if I wanted more carrots, and I opened my mouth, and His voice finally broke all the way. I asked you what you thought about the Tigers' bullpen. That's what came out. The bullpen. He put his hand over his eyes for a moment. I let him. The clock ticked. Outside, the light was going down over the water, orange in the window, the way it does. So you found another way, I said quietly. He nodded behind his hand. And then he lowered it, and he told me the rest, and every strange thing from the last week stood up one by one and turned around to face me. There's a number, he said. An elder fraud line. The bank has one. It's on their website. I must have read that page 100 times. 2 weeks ago I called it, from the marina parking lot. I didn't give my name, I gave them yours. I told them to look at the savings account, look at the power of attorney on file, look at the withdrawals since March. And the woman kept asking who I was, and I couldn't. I just kept saying, look at the account, and I hung up. He took a breath. And then I waited a week, and nothing happened that I could see, and I couldn't sleep, and I thought, they need a reason. They need a reason to open the file, a real one, something official. And I thought about what would do it. And I thought, a new name on the account. They'd have to pull everything. They'd have to look. The eggs, the porch step. How much do you actually keep in savings, Grandpa? Not casing the account. Counting the damage. Thursday morning, before it gets busy, because the boy had called the branch and found out, somehow, when Marcus Ellison would be at his desk. The phone call he took on my new porch step, with his back to the house. The calm, the terrible, telling calm, when Marcus stopped my hand. The exhale, the shoulders coming down. I've only ever seen that look on people who were hoping to be caught, or hoping someone else would be. I needed them to catch it, Caleb said. His voice had gone almost to a whisper. I needed the truth to come from somewhere that wasn't me. Because I can live with a lot of things, Grandpa, but I couldn't be the one who... He's my dad. I couldn't be the one to say it. So I made the bank say it instead. I used you to do it. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You sat in that chair, not understanding anything, and that was because of me. Stop, I said gently. Stop there. He stopped. He sat across from me, 22 years old, wrung out, ears red, my wife's smile buried somewhere in that face. And I looked at him for a long moment. This boy I had spent 5 days suspecting. This boy who had spent 6 weeks alone in the dark, carrying his father and his grandfather on his back at the same time, looking for a way to save one without destroying the other. You fixed my porch step that morning, I said. It wasn't a question. I don't know exactly what it was, but he understood it, the way he's always understood me. And his face came apart in a new way, softer, and he said, I didn't know what else to fix. We sat with that, the two of us and the clock, and Ellen's orange light dying in the window. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. The same way, I realized, that Marcus had put his hand over mine, and neither of us said anything. Because there wasn't anything. Because some things you just sit inside of together. And that's when the headlights swept across the kitchen wall. We both turned. A truck was pulling into my driveway. I knew the engine before I saw it, the way you know your own child's footsteps. And Caleb went very still. And then he said, in a voice gone hollow, I finally sent it, Grandpa. The text. An hour ago, before I came over. 2 words. He was staring at the wall where the lights had been. He knows. Out in the driveway, the engine shut off, and the door of David's truck opened. I heard his boots on the porch, on the new step, the one that didn't groan anymore, and then 3 knocks, not the doorbell. 3 slow knocks, the way a man knocks when he's hoping nobody's home. Caleb stood up from the table. His chair scraped the floor, and it sounded like a shout in that kitchen. He looked at me, and then at the door, and I watched him try to decide who he belonged beside, and I saved him from having to. Go on out back, son, I said. Sit on the porch a while. This part isn't yours. Grandpa, you carried it far enough. Hand it here. He held my eyes for a second. Then he nodded, that small nod, twice, and God help me, it's his father's nod. It's the exact nod David gave me in this kitchen 3 years ago over a question I answered with a proverb. And he went out the back door, and I heard the screen door close soft behind him, and I went and opened the front one. My son stood on my porch in the dark. I want to describe him to you the way I saw him, because I had spent 5 days looking at bank statements and forged signatures and building a picture of a man, and the man standing in my doorway did not match the picture. He hadn't shaved in a couple days. He was still in his work shirt, haze stitched over the pocket in his mother's favorite blue, and he stood there with his hands hanging at his sides like they'd been unplugged from him, and he looked at me the way men look at the ocean. He'd had an hour with those 2 words on his phone. He knows. An hour. And then he'd gotten in the truck and driven here, straight into it. And I'll tell you something. Whatever else was true about David that night, he did not run. His father noticed that. Fathers notice. "Pop," he said. That was all. His voice barely made it across the doorway. "Come in, David. Coffee's already poured." He came in. He looked at the table, 2 cups, 1 chair pushed back, and understood whose chair it had been. And something moved across his face. He didn't ask. He sat down in the chair his son had just left, and I sat across from him, where I'd been sitting all night. And for a long time, a genuinely long time, a minute or more, and a minute of silence at a kitchen table is a geological age. Neither of us said anything. He couldn't start. I could see him trying. His mouth would begin and stop, and his hands were wrapped around the coffee cup, not drinking, just holding it, the way you hold something warm when you're cold in a place blankets don't reach. So I started for him, gently, terribly, with the only thing I had that could open the door without breaking it. 47,300, I said. Was it the shop? His whole body flinched at the number, hearing it out loud, in this kitchen, in my voice. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, my son looked at me and did the one thing I will always be able to say for him. He didn't reach for a single excuse, not one. He went the other way. "The shop's the end of it," he said, "not the start. You want the start, Pop. You have to go back 6 years. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. You have to go back to Maria. Maria. Nobody knows this. Not Caleb. Not you. Nobody. He was speaking very quietly, very evenly, the way men speak when they've rehearsed a confession so many times in the dark that all the feeling has been worn into the words like grooves. When she died, the insurance had... There were caps. Things they wouldn't cover. The trial treatment in Ann Arbor, the last 8 months of it. The transport. All of it. When it was over and I buried my wife, I was holding just about $80,000 of medical debt. I sat very still. $80,000. 6 years ago. My son, living 20 minutes from this table. 80, I said. 81 and change. He almost smiled, the awful, almost smile of a man reciting the number that has been the first thing in his head every morning for 6 years. I know it to the dollar, Pop. I've always known it to the dollar. And you told no one. Who was I going to tell? He said it without heat, genuinely asking. Maria was gone. Caleb was 16, and he'd just watched his mother die. I was supposed to sit that boy down and tell him she left us broke, too? Let him spend high school thinking every dollar I spent on him was $1 of that? He shook his head. No. So I paid it. 6 years, every month, quiet. I refinanced the house once, and then a second time. I let the town think Hayes Heating was doing fine, because a heating man who's doing fine gets hired, and one who isn't gets pitied and passed over. And I could not afford to be pitied, Pop, in the actual dollars and cents meaning of afford. His thumb moved along the rim of the cup. And it was working. Slow, but working. I had it down under 30. 6 years, down under 30. And I never missed. And nobody ever knew. And then the plant closed. And then the plant closed. He said it the way you'd say, and then the tide came in. 60% of my commercial work gone by Christmas. I let Dale go in January, kept Ricky on because Ricky's got the baby, and half the time I couldn't cover him and paid him out of my own, it doesn't matter. Sold the 3rd truck. Then the second mortgage payments started getting away from me, and in March, he stopped. His jaw worked. This was the part of the groove where the rehearsal ran out. In March, 2 letters came in the same week. One was from the bank about the house. First warning. The word foreclosure was in it, in the second paragraph, like it was nothing, like it was weather. And the other one was from Central Michigan. Caleb's balance. Final notice before they dropped him from fall classes. The clock ticked over the stove. Out back, faintly, I could hear the porch boards shift. My grandson, sitting in the dark, close enough to hear the shape of it, if not the words. I promised her, David said. And here his voice finally lost its evenness. Not loudly, it just cracked. One clean crack down the middle, like ice does. In the hospice, the last week, when she was still, she made me lean down and she said, "He finishes school, Davy. Whatever happens to everything else, he finishes." And I promised her. I held her hand, and I promised my dying wife, Pop. And in March, I'm sitting at my desk with 2 letters, and I cannot keep the promise and the house at the same time. And He stopped himself. Both hands flat on the table now. He looked down at them. "I'm not going to sit in your kitchen and dress it up," he said. "You want to know what I told myself? I'll tell you exactly, because I've had 6 months of 4 a.m. to get honest about it. I told myself it was a loan. I told myself it was my inheritance coming a little early. I told myself you never touch that account, you'd never even look, and by the time you did, I'd have it back in there with interest, and no one would ever be the wiser, and no one would ever be hurt." He raised his eyes to mine. "Those are the things a man tells himself, Pop, while he's practicing his father's signature on the back of an envelope. I know what I am. There's no version of this where I'm not a thief. I've known it every morning at 4 a.m. since March. I knew it while I was doing it. I did it anyway." And there it was, all of it, on my kitchen table, next to the cold coffee. My son, the thief. My son, the widower. My son, who kept his dying wife's promise with his father's stolen money, and who had just laid it all out without once, not once, asking me to forgive him, because he did not believe he had the right to ask. And I'll tell you what I felt, because I promised you honesty at the start of this. I felt the anger, yes. It was there. It's real. $47,000 of Ellen doesn't dissolve in a sad story, and I won't pretend it does. But sitting alongside the anger, and slowly outgrowing it, was something with a longer root. Because I was looking at a man who had carried $81,000 of grief in absolute silence for 6 years, 20 minutes from my door, And I was the reason for the silence. Not the debt, the silence. He must have seen something in my face, because he said the next thing almost gently, like he was handing me something breakable. I did try to ask you once. You probably don't even remember. After Mom died. I remember, I said. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. I remember it better than you'd think, I said. You stood right about there. You kept picking up your mother's things and putting them down. You said things were a little tight at the shop, and you waited, and my voice did its own small cracking then. 71 years old, and it still surprises you when it happens. I answered you with a proverb. Money between family gets complicated, Davy. 6 words. I've been living inside those 6 words since Thursday, and I'll tell you what I found in there. My father, and his father. Every Hayes man, back to whichever fool started it. All of us handing each other proverbs instead of help, and calling it character. Pop, you don't have to. I'm not finished. I said it quietly, but I said it in the shop voice, and he went still. What you did was wrong, David. I want no confusion between us about that. Not tonight, not ever. You forged my name. You took your mother's savings, because that's whose it is. It was never mine. And you took it in the dark. And the fact that your reasons break my heart does not make it something other than stealing. You'll carry that. That's yours. He nodded, twice, small. But here's what's mine, I said. You asked me once, and I closed the door. And then I watched you for 6 years. Sunday dinners, Christmases, the funeral, all of it. And not once did I ask my own son how he was really doing. Not once. I asked about the tigers. I asked about the furnace business like it was weather. I sat across tables from a drowning man for 6 years because he was drowning politely, the way I raised him to. I had to stop for a moment. You never asked again, but I never asked at all. So we built this thing together, son. You laid the last brick. But I dug the foundation, and I dug it years ago. And I'd have to be a smaller man than I hope I am not, to say so out loud. David put his hand over his mouth, held it there. My boy, 48 years old, gray coming in at the temples, sitting in the chair he'd sat in for homework and report cards and the phone call about Maria. And he was doing the thing men in this family do instead of weeping, which is to grip our own faces like the grief might get loose. The clock ticked. The screen door out back stayed quiet. Some long minute passed through the kitchen and took its time going. Then David lowered his hand, and he asked me the only question left, and he asked it the way a man asks about a sentence, not a favor. So what happens now, Pop? The bank, the filu? I know they froze the last of it. I got the notice. Whatever you decide to do, I won't fight you. If it's the police, it's the police. His voice went down to almost nothing. I'd ask you to let me be the one to tell Caleb. That's all I'd ask. The rest is yours. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I pushed back my chair, and I stood, and I took my coat off the hook by the door, and I watched my son brace himself for a verdict, shoulders squared, the way you'd stand for sentencing, the way his boy had sat braced in a bank chair 5 days ago, because that is apparently how Hayes men wait for the truth to land on them. I put my coat on. I settled the collar. Be at the bank at 9, I said. Both of you. At 9 o'clock the next morning, The three of us walked into Harbor Community Bank together, and Donna looked up from her window and saw us, the whole broken set of us, grandfather, son, grandson. And she didn't smile this time. She did something better. She nodded, once, the way you nod at people arriving at a funeral. I see you. Go on in. Somewhere in this story, I owe that woman more than I'll ever find a way to say, and she'd wave me off if I tried, which is exactly why I owe it. Marcus was waiting at his office door. He'd known we were coming. I'd called at 8 when they opened, and told him what paper I'd be signing. He shook my hand. He shook David's hand, too, and I watched that closely, because I wanted to see whether Marcus Ellison would shake the hand of the man whose transfers he'd flagged. And he did. Brief, level, professional. No warmth and no cruelty either. A man being exactly the size of his job. Then he showed us in, and there were 3 chairs this time instead of 2, and I understood he'd carried the extra one in himself. The affidavit was already on the desk, squared to the blotter. 1 page. It's a strangely short document for what it does. Affidavit of forgery. My name, my account, the date of the power of attorney, and a paragraph swearing under penalty of perjury that the signature on that instrument was not made by my hand, and that I never granted the authority it claims. There was a line at the bottom for me. There was a notary's seal waiting by Marcus's elbow, a real notarization this time, the kind where the man watches you breathe out. David and Caleb sat behind me, side by side, like men at a sentencing. Neither of them had said much in the truck. What was there to say? Caleb had spent the night at my place. Nobody suggested it. He just hadn't left. And David had gone home to an empty house with everything out in the open at last. And whatever passed between father and son in the parking lot that morning, before they came in, they'd done it standing close together with their heads down. And I'd stayed in the truck and let them have it. Marcus went through it one more time, slowly, for the record and for mercy. Mr. Hayes, once you sign, I'm required to act on it. The power of attorney is voided as of this moment. The pending transfer is canceled, and the $12,600 remains in your account under your sole control. And the file, all of it, goes forward, to the people whose job it is to look at it. You understand that I don't control what happens after that. I understand. Then, whenever you're ready. I picked up the pen. And I'll tell you the truth. I looked back at my son, not for permission, for witness. Because there was a version of this where I signed that paper in a closed room, and David heard about it from a detective. And there was this version, where a father tells the truth about his son, with his son watching. And the difference between those 2 versions is the difference between punishment and honesty. David held my eyes. He nodded. Twice. Small. I breathed out, and I signed my name. The W with the long tail, the cramped middle, the surrender in the Y. And for the first time in 5 days, my signature meant exactly what it said. The detective came to my house 2 days later. Detective Ramos, a patient woman about David's age, who'd clearly sat at 100 kitchen tables like mine. She took my statement. She took the documents. And then she asked me the question I'd been waiting for, the one the whole machine turns on. Mr. Hayes, as the victim in this matter, how do you want to proceed? I'd had my answer built for 2 days, measured twice. I want the truth on the record, I said. Every word of it, that's why I signed. But the family has reached a restitution agreement, in writing, through a lawyer. Every dollar comes back. and I won't be supporting a prosecution. Not because it wasn't a crime, detective. Because I'm 71 years old, and I've done the arithmetic on what prison takes out of a family versus what it puts back. And the numbers don't work. She looked at me for a while. Then she closed her notebook, and she said something I've thought about since. You'd be surprised how many of these end up in this kitchen, Mr. Hayes, sitting right where you're sitting. Most of them just never get the truth part first. Cases like ours, she told me plainly, with restitution in place and a victim who won't cooperate, rarely go anywhere. The report would exist. It would sit in a file, true forever. That was enough for me. I never wanted a cage for my son. I wanted the record straight and the lying finished. And those are not the same thing as revenge, no matter what anyone tells you. The restitution agreement got drawn up proper. A lawyer in town. Everything notarized. Nobody's handshake standing in for paper ever again in this family. $400 a month for as long as it takes. At $47,300, that's the better part of 10 years, and David wanted it steeper, wanted it to hurt more, and I refused, because a payment a man can actually make every month for 10 years is worth more than a grand gesture that breaks him by Christmas. The lawyer asked if I wanted interest. I said the account had been earning about nothing for years, and I saw no reason my son should pay a better rate than the bank did. It was the only time that week anybody laughed. But the agreement had one more condition in it, and this one I dictated myself, and I made the lawyer write it in, even though he said it wasn't the kind of thing that usually goes in these documents. I told him this family had spent 60 years being careful about what goes in documents, and look where it got us. The condition is this. The first Sunday of every month, David Hayes has dinner at my table, and he brings the books. The shop's books, the real ones, the mortgage, the payables, Ricky's wages, all of it. And they sit open on the table between the pot roast and the coffee, and we go through them together. Not as a debtor reporting to a creditor. That's what I made the lawyer get exactly right in the language, and what I said out loud to David's face, so there'd be no mistaking it. As a son who asks. That's the payment I actually want, Davy. The $400 is for your mother. The Sundays are for me. He couldn't answer that for a while. When he could, all he said was, "First Sunday." And he's kept it. 2 Sundays so far, books open on the table, and I won't pretend it isn't strange yet. 2 grown men learning a language late in life, pointing at numbers because the numbers are easier than the sentences. But the second Sunday was easier than the first. That's all recovery is, I think. Each one slightly easier for years, until you can't remember which Sunday it stopped being a condition and started being dinner. And Ellen's money, what David called the "when it matters" money, the phrase arriving in his mouth like she'd loaned it to him. I told him what I'd worked out about that, standing on my porch the night everything broke open. Your mother called it the "when it matters" money. Near as I can tell, she'd have said this is what it was for, the debt, the boys' school, all of it. She'd have handed you every dime, David. She'd have also wanted to be asked. So that's the whole of the new law in this family, and it's got one word in it. From now on, we ask. 6 weeks later, I walked into Harbor Community Bank on a bright Thursday morning, early, before it got busy. And I sat down in the same chair, at the same desk, and Marcus Ellison slid a signature card. No, not a signature card. A document, a real one this time, drafted by the same lawyer, every line of it read aloud to me twice, witnessed properly, with Marcus's own notary seal waiting at his elbow. A durable power of attorney, genuine, chosen, naming as my agent, with full authority over everything I have, one person, Caleb Hayes. He sat in the chair beside me, the same chair, and this time it was his turn to be uneasy, his ears going pink, and he leaned over as I picked up the pen and said, "You're sure about this, Grandpa? After everything? You're sure?" And I looked at this boy who found the worst thing a person can find and carried it alone for 6 weeks because he loved 2 men too much to hurt either one.
Who couldn't say the truth, so he built a machine to say it for him, out of a porch step and a plate of eggs and a Thursday morning. Who fixed what he could reach because he couldn't reach what was broken. "A signature's just trust with a date on it," I told him. "This one's got the right date." I breathed out, and I signed. Marcus took the paper, and he pressed his seal into it, and then he did a small thing that closed a circle only the 2 of us could see. He laid his hand flat on the page for a moment, the same hand that had covered mine and stopped my pen, only this time he was steadying the document while the ink dried. Then he looked up, and for the first time in this whole long story, Marcus Ellison smiled like a man off duty. "Welcome back, Mr. Hayes." Through the front window, out at the curb, David's truck was waiting, the good one, the one he kept, to take the 3 of us to lunch at the diner. I could see him at the wheel, and on the dashboard, propped against the glass where he'd see it every time he drove, a plain white envelope. I knew what was in it because he'd handed it to me that morning, and I'd handed it right back and told him it goes to the bank like a civilized payment. And he'd said, "Let me just look at it a while first, Pop." $400. The first one. He wanted to look at it. I understood that better than I could ever explain. Caleb held the door for me on the way out, and the 3 of us walked into the sunlight together. And I want to leave you with the thing I understand now that I didn't understand 40 years of Thursdays ago. People think a bank keeps your money safe. That's not what a bank is. A bank is a building full of people who notice your handwriting, a teller who knows you always come in yourself, a manager who watches which people argue and which people exhale. My money was never what that building was guarding. It took a stranger refusing my name to teach me what my name was worth.